Hi everyone. Today we're going to discuss an interesting topic. We're going to briefly mention the International Space Station and how urine processing for astronauts has quite a lot to do with the modern systems. So bear with me as we're going to tackle that topic together. We're going to start by briefly explaining that on the International Space Station, astronauts drink water that has been recovered from urine, sweat, and even moisture in their breath. And that detail isn't shocking because it's strange, but it's rather powerful because it reveals something fundamental. In space, there is no away. And on the International Space Station, water moves in a loop. I'm going to briefly show you now a diagram, and we can see that the flow is from the water being, the urine being distilled, filtered, purified, and returned to the crew. In the same way, oxygen can be generated through electrolysis, and carbon dioxide is scrubbed and partially converted back into water. So every output becomes an input, and the station functions because circulation is built into its design. And that is because in orbit, consequences are immediate. If the water system fails, people dehydrate. If oxygen production stops, breathing stops. If thermal regulation fails, the station overheats. So the boundary is very visible, feedback is immediate, and survival and system design are aligned. On Earth, however, boundaries feel invisible. Resources might appear abundant, waste disappears from view, and also consequences stretch across geography and across time. The stretch itself can create the impression that impact can be absorbed indefinitely. But ecosystems don't operate on impressions, they operate on feedback. And that delay in feedback is still feedback. So when consequences are pushed forward in time, they do accumulate. And when they accumulate long enough, correction becomes abrupt. Now, this isn't necessarily dramatic, but it's rather, in the structural sense of it, it is fascinating. Not only about the environmental dimension, but also the psychological one, because human nervous systems evolve in environments where cause and effect were immediate and local. Let's say small groups, clear feedback, direct consequences. But modern systems operate at a scale far beyond that. So when survival requires constant labor, constant productivity, constant mental load, attention narrows and energy goes towards short-term stability, which means also the bandwidth shrinks. And when bandwidth shrinks, long-term systemic feedback becomes harder to perceive. So it's not that people don't ignore the consequences because they're indifferent, but it's more that they do ignore them because of cognitive and emotional resources being heavily taxed and consumed. So biology is operating inside large-scale structures, but in space, astronauts live inside a clearly defined system. They know the life support architecture, they understand the water recovery system, they see the boundary that keeps them alive. So that transparency creates alignment, and responsibility is shared because survival is shared. No one on the station is separate from the system that sustains them. On Earth, however, infrastructure is layered and distant. Energy grids, supply chains, extraction sites, waste systems, they're distilled and often invisible. Distance creates the perception that time can stretch beyond consequence, but ecological systems are cyclical. They do regenerate, they do rebalance and respond. The Earth has endured, for example, mass extinctions, climate shifts, tectonic upheavals, and it will continue to change. The real question is not whether the planet survives. The real question is whether human systems align with the feedback loops that sustain human life. For example, space engineering offers clarity. When you design inside a closed system, you design for circulation, you design for regeneration, you design knowing that nothing disappears. On Earth, many systems are designed for throughput: extract, produce, consume, discard. Throughput can expand for a while, but human civilization still exists within ecological boundaries. We are part of that system, whether we do acknowledge that or not, and time does not erase consequence. It might only temporarily compress it. And when feedback tightens, reality becomes visible again. So it's not about fear, but rather about awareness. And once we recognize that we are inside the system, design becomes tangible. Funding becomes directional and incentives become adjustable. So that mindset shifts from stretching time to aligning with it. And space makes that very visible because the boundary specifically cannot be ignored. Art requires us to recognize that boundary voluntarily, or should I say temporarily, until it becomes clearly visible. So that recognition is not necessarily ideological or structural. Um, Again, reminding that we are inside feedback loops and we always have been. And the difference whether we design that with awareness or wait for correction to make that undeniable. And that's one of the beautiful things that space gives us is clarity, not just like in a technological way, but also alignment with consequence. And that alignment is what allowed systems and humans to ultimately endure and evolve. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that was interesting. I hope that you found it quite funny too. And thank you. Have a nice day. Take care.